Hey family, welcome back to Black Queen Revenge. We've got a unique story for you today, full of emotion and real-life drama. If you love these stories, please like, comment, subscribe, and share your ideas for future videos. So, let's begin. The lilies on the coffin had smelled like death, a cloying, sweet scent that clung to the back of the throat. 2 hours after we lowered my 8-year-old son, Zion, into the cold, waiting earth, that scent had migrated into the very fabric of our home, weaving itself into the curtains, the upholstery, the silent, grieving air. The house on Willow Lane was no longer a home. It was a museum of absence, filled with the murmuring ghosts of condolences. "God's will," they whispered, their faces masks of pity. "He's at peace now." Their words were stones dropped into a bottomless well of my grief, producing no echo, no comfort. Zion, my vibrant, sun-bright boy, felled by something as sterile and unbelievable as a massive heart attack, a rare anomaly. The diagnosis was a locked door, and I lacked the strength to batter it down. So I sat on the edge of my unmed bed, a black-clad statue, staring at the photograph on the nightstand. In it, Zion grinned, a gap-toothed, triumphant smile, clutching a track and field trophy as if it were the sun itself. Through the bedroom door, left ajar in a vain hope that normalcy might wander in, I watched my husband, Marcus. He moved through the crowded living room with the solemn grace of a ruined king. His shoulders, usually so square and confident in his tailored suits, were slumped under an invisible weight. His eyes, a deep, expressive brown I had once loved to get lost in, were raw and red-rimmed. He accepted handshakes, returned hugs, his voice a low, steady murmur of gratitude. Everyone saw his strength. "What a pillar," they said. "How does he bear it so well, for her sake?" My eyes, dry and burning, followed him as he was approached by Mr. Alistair Finch, the silver-haired, impeccably polite president of the Evergreen Foundation, the charitable trust that funded Zion's prestigious private school, Laurelwood Academy. Finch was a pillar of the community, a man whose name adorned a library wings and hospital wings. He clasped Marcus's shoulder, a fatherly gesture, his lips moving in words of comfort. Marcus bowed his head, the very picture of a son receiving benediction. A sudden, sharp twist of nausea coiled in my stomach. It was an irrational feeling, a physical revulsion that had nothing to do with grief. It was a primal alarm, silent but screaming. Before I could examine it, a vibration buzzed against my thigh, sharp and insistent. My phone, discarded on the quilt, glowed with an incoming call. The name on the screen stopped my breath. Miss Vanya Petrova, Zion's teacher. Confusion cut through the fog. She had been at the funeral, a slender, pale figure standing apart, her usually cheerful face dissolved in quiet tears. Why would she call now? With fingers that felt numb and thick, I swiped to answer and brought the device to my ear. "Hello?" The voice that came through was not the warm, melodic tone I associated with Zion's stories about his kind teacher. It was a thread of sound, strained and terror-tight, as if she were speaking from inside a tomb. "Mrs. Thorne, Amara, listen to me. You must listen carefully." A ragged intake of breath. "I found something. In Zion's desk. Something he hid. You need to see it with your own eyes." "Miss Vanya, what is it? I don't understand." "You must understand," she hissed, the whisper urgent. "Come to the school, now, the teachers' lounge on the second floor. Do not tell a soul, not your family, not anyone. This is dangerous." The word hung between us, an icicle in the warm, flower-scented air of my bedroom. Dangerous. "What did you find?" My voice was a ghost of itself. "I can't say. Not on the phone. Just come. And Amara, trust no one but me." The line went dead. For a long moment, I simply sat, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone as if it might morph back into speech. Grief, that heavy, suffocating blanket, was violently yanked aside. In its place surged a sharp, electrifying alertness. A mother's instinct, dormant and helpless against medical jargon, now ignited with a fierce, blinding clarity. Something about Zion, something hidden, dangerous. I stood, my legs trembling, not from weakness, but from a sudden influx of purpose. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand, erasing the tracks of tears that now felt like a previous wife's sorrow. I had to go. I had to know. I found Marcus on the front porch, seeing off the last of the visitors with Mr. Finch. The older man was patting his back, a final gesture of solidarity, before stepping into his chauffeured car. "Marcus," I said, my voice carefully calibrated to sound frail. "The headache, it's blinding. My medication is in the car. I need to go to the pharmacy, get some air." He turned, his face a masterpiece of concerned husbandry. "Darling, let me go. You shouldn't be alone." "Please," I insisted, layering a tremor into my words. "I need 15 minutes, just to breathe. The walls are closing in." He studied my face, his eyes searching. I held my grief and my newfound fear in front of me like a shield. After a moment, he nodded, his expression softening. "Of course, don't be long. The night air isn't good for you." Mr. Finch offered a benign, sorrowful smile from his car window. "Take care of yourself, my dear." I walked to my sedan, my back prickling under their combined gaze. Only when I turned the corner, leaving Willow Lane behind, did I let the mask crack, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Laurelwood Academy at night was a fortress of shadows. The grand iron gates, usually shut and guarded, stood inexplicably ajar. No security guard was visible in his booth. The fine drizzle from earlier had strengthened into a steady, cold rain, painting the manicured lawns and neo-Gothic buildings in streaks of reflected yellow from the sodium vapor streetlights. It felt less like a school and more like a stage set for a tragedy. Parking a block away under the skeletal branches of an ancient oak, I hurried across the slick courtyard, my low heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the flagstones. The main administrative building was dark, but a faint fluorescent glow leaked from a second-floor window, the teacher's lounge. The interior hallway was a tunnel of darkness, the only illumination the grim gray light from the windows. The thread of light under the lounge door was a beacon. As I drew closer, the air grew thicker, harder to breathe. A primal warning screamed in my veins. I stopped before the door, which was open a mere crack. Peering through the gap, my heart seized. Miss Vanya was pressed against a bank of gray filing cabinets, her face the color of chalk. Her wide hazel eyes were pools of pure, undiluted terror. Her hands were raised in a universal gesture of supplication, and standing over her, his back to me, was a man in a black dress shirt and dark trousers. His posture, the set of his shoulders, the way his weight rested on his left leg, was as familiar to me as my own reflection. The faint, expensive scent of his sandalwood and vetral cologne drifted into the hall. It was Marcus. In his hand, he held a small, sleek black object, a USB drive or an external storage device. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, venomous thing I had never heard before, stripped of all warmth, all pretense. "A foolish risk, Miss Petrova. A sentimental one. Give it to me, and this unpleasantness ends. You can resign quietly, pursue other opportunities." "I already told you," Vanya stammered, her voice shaking. "It's not here. I didn't take it." "You called her," Marcus said, the words dropping like stones. "You think I don't know? You think I'm not watching?" I pushed the door, the old hinge emitting a low groan. Marcus whirled around, his body coiling with alert tension. The fluorescent light overhead washed over his features, and for a second I saw not my husband, but a stranger, calculating, cold, his eyes sharp with a dangerous intent. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, his expression melted into the familiar mask of grief-stricken exhaustion. The transformation was so swift, so complete, it left me dizzy. "Amara," he breathed, the picture of shocked concern. He subtly slipped the black device into his pants pocket. What are you doing here?" My voice wouldn't work. I looked from his manufactured concern to Vanya's petrified face. Marcus followed my gaze and sighed, a sound heavy with performed sorrow. "I couldn't bear the house, the silence. I came to collect Zion's things from his desk, before the cleaners. I just wanted to—" His voice broke perfectly. He glanced at Vanya, a flicker of something hard passing through his eyes. She flinched. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the filing cabinet. "Mr. Thorne came for Zion's belongings. We were reminiscing." It was a pathetic lie. The fear radiating from her was a palpable force. Marcus closed the distance and put an arm around my shoulders, his grip firm, possessive. "We should go home, my love. This place, it's not good for you." On a small table by the window sat a cardboard box filled with colorful drawings, math notebooks, and a few chewed pencils, Zion's worldly academic possessions. As Marcus guided me toward the door, he deftly, almost invisibly, tucked the small black device from his pocket into the box, burying it under a sheaf of papers. He thought I hadn't seen. He moved ahead of me to hold the door. In that sliver of a moment, Vanya sprang forward. Her movements were jerky, frantic. "Your scarf, Mrs. Thorne," her freezing fingers fumbling with the silk hijab at my neck, which had slipped slightly in the rain. "It's crooked." Her touch was like ice, but as she pretended to adjust the fabric, I felt her slip something small and stiff into the hidden fold near my shoulder. Her eyes locked onto mine. In their depths, beneath the terror, was a ferocious, desperate plea. Her lips moved, soundlessly forming a single, unmistakable word: "Run." My blood turned to ice. I managed a stiff nod, muttering a thank you. Marcus turned, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What was that?" "She was just offering her condolences again, telling me to be strong." He held my gaze for a beat too long, then nodded, taking my hand. His felt warm, dry, and utterly alien. As we left, I glanced back. Vanya stood frozen in the center of the room, a lone figure in the harsh fluorescent light, looking like someone waiting for a firing squad. The drive home was a silent voyage through a nightmare. Marcus drove with a serene focus, occasionally wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. He turned on a classical station, a Chopin nocturne, music he once said reminded him of their honeymoon in Paris. Now it sounded like a dirge. I sat stiffly, feeling the sharp corner of the hidden paper digging into my collarbone. The man beside me, the father of my child, had just cornered and threatened a woman. He had a secret he was willing to intimidate to protect. The seed of doubt Vanya had planted was now a poisonous, fast-growing vine, strangling every happy memory, every moment of trust. Scenes flashed. Zion's complaints of stomachaches over the last 6 months, his unusual fatigue, the way he'd fall asleep at the dinner table, Marcus's insistence on managing all Zion's doctor visits and medications, his dismissive anger when I suggested a second opinion from a pediatric specialist, instead of relying on old Dr. Evans, the family physician and a distant cousin of Mr. Finch. "Finch trusts him. We trust Finch. He knows Zion's history," Marcus said, his tone brooking no argument. The pieces, once isolated and ignorable, now tumbled together, clicking into a configuration so monstrous my mind recoiled. At home, the remaining relatives were clearing up. I pleaded exhaustion and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Only then, with my back against the solid wood, did I let the tremors take me. With fumbling fingers, I retrieved the paper from my hijab. It was a torn sheet from a teacher's notepad, the handwriting rushed and spasmodic. Zion was not sick. They switched his vitamins. Check the bear. He knew. He recorded them. Your husband is not who you think.
Danger, V. The world dissolved. The floor fell away. I crumpled, the paper clutched in my fist, a silent scream tearing at my throat. Not sick, switched his vitamins. Poison. They had poisoned my baby, slowly, deliberately. And they included the man now moving around in the kitchen below, the clink of a teacup, a grotesque parody of domesticity. Grief did not vanish. It transmuted. It hardened in my core, becoming something black, dense, and furious, a vengeful star where my heart used to be. Tears were a luxury for the innocent. I was not innocent anymore. I waited until I heard Marcus's footsteps descend to the basement, then slipped out and into Zion's room. The smell of him, childhood sweat, strawberry shampoo, the waxy scent of crayons, hit me like a physical blow. His room was a shrine to interrupted life. Lego creations sat half-built on the carpet, superhero posters grinned from the walls, and on his pillow, sitting upright as if keeping watch, was Barnaby, the giant cocoa-brown teddy bear I'd given him for his 6th birthday. Check the bear. I crossed the room and picked up Barnaby. He was worn soft with love. Running my hands over his plush back, I felt it, a ridge of clumsy, uneven stitching, a repair job done by small, determined hands. Zion loved secret compartments. I retrieved a small pair of craft scissors from his desk. With a reverence that felt like sacrilege, I snipped the threads and parted the seam. Nestled in the white polyester stuffing was a small rectangular digital recorder, a spy gadget my best friend Kaylin had given him last Christmas. Zion adored it, recording silly voices and imagined radio shows. Hands shaking violently, I pressed play.
Zion's voice filled the quiet room, but it was thin, strained, a shadow of his usual boisterous tone. Day, I don't know. Thursday? My tummy hurts real bad. Dad gave me the new red vitamin. It tastes like metal and bitter, not like the yummy ones Mom gives. I don't like it. I told Dad it makes me sleepy and my head buzzes, but he said it's super strength juice. He gets mad if I spit it out. I'm scared to tell Mom. He said it's our secret. A rustle, then the sound of a door opening, heavy, adult footsteps. Then Marcus's voice, clear and chillingly casual, as if discussing a stock portfolio. Don't worry, Alistair, the dosage is calibrated. The event will look natural, a tragic, rare cardiac event. Once the inheritance releases from the grandfather's trust to the guardian, that's me, we proceed, 50-50, as agreed. Just ensure the foundation's property transfer documents are ready for my signature. The Laurelwood land deal is the real prize. A muffled response from another voice, older, refined, Mr. Finch. The child is a means to an end, Marcus. A regrettable one, but the trust's provisions are ironclad. No minor, no inheritance. His death unlocks everything. And with Dr. Evans writing the certificate, no questions will be asked. The recording ended. The silence in the room was absolute, more terrible than any sound. I sat on Zion's bed, the recorder a cold, guilty weight in my palm. My husband, my son's godfather, Alistair Finch, the family doctor, a conspiracy of monsters in suits poisoning a child for money and real estate. The doorknob rattled. Amara? Marcus's voice was calm, but with an edge. Why is this locked? Open the door. I stuffed the recorder into the deep pocket of my dress and stood. My eyes darted around the room. The door was the only exit. The rattling became pounding. Amara, open this door now. The calm was gone, replaced by a snarling urgency. The door shook in its frame. He knew. He must have checked the box, found the device missing, and guessed I had it. The window. Zion's room was on the 2nd floor, but just outside was the old, sprawling magnolia tree, its branches thick and gnarled. I'd scolded him a dozen times for climbing it.
I threw open the window latch. The rain was a cold, driving slap. As I swung my leg over the sill, the bedroom door exploded inward, splintering around the lock. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face a contorted mask of rage and panic. He saw the open window, the bear on the bed with its stuffing spilled. "You bitch!" he roared, lunging. I didn't look back. I found the thickest branch with my foot, wrapped my arms around another, and swung out into the storm. The bark tore at my hands and clothes. I half climbed, half fell through the wet foliage, thudding onto the sodden grass just as Marcus's enraged face appeared at the window above. "Amara!" I scrambled up, my bare feet sinking into the mud, and ran. I fled through the back garden gate into the alley and didn't stop running until I reached the bright, impersonal lights of a 24-hour gas station on the highway. Shaking, soaked, and barefoot, I huddled behind a dumpster and fumbled with my water-damaged phone. Only one person. Only one. I called Kaylin. It rang twice. "Amara? God, what's wrong?" His voice, gravelly with sleep, was instantly alert. "Amara," I choked out. "Kaylin, he killed Zion. Marcus killed him. I have proof. I'm at the Petra Star on the highway. Please, please come." I hung up before he could respond and powered the phone off. The 15 minutes it took for his beat-up Jeep Cherokee to arrive were an eternity. Every set of headlights was his black SUV. When Kaylin finally pulled up, his lean, angular face etched with concern, I stumbled into the passenger seat, a creature of mud and madness. He took one look at me, handed me a blanket from the back, and drove without a word. Only when we were moving did I break, the story and the sobs tumbling out in a chaotic, horrific jumble. I played him the recorder. I saw his knuckles whiten on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. Kaylin was an investigative journalist for the city's last reputable paper, a man who lived for unearthing rot. But this was personal. "We can't go to the police. Not yet. Finch has donors in the prosecutor's office. Half the police charity ball is sponsored by his foundation. That recording alone could be disappeared, and we'd disappear with it." He took me not to his apartment, but to a nondescript safe house he maintained under a spare studio above a closed tailor shop in a forgotten part of the city. It was there, surrounded by the smell of dust and old paper, that the grieving mother was buried. In her place, a hunter was forged. "We need more," Kaylin said, spreading a map of the city on the bare table. "We need the physical poison. We need them to confess in a way they can't deny. We need to turn them against each other." The first step was to become a ghost. I cut my long hair to my shoulders with kitchen shears. Kaylin brought me clothes, simple jeans, sweaters, a dark blue practical hijab. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the hollow-eyed woman staring back. Amara Thorne, society wife, was gone. We learned Marcus, in his role as Director of Operations for the Evergreen Foundation, had his office deep cleaned every Friday by an external service. Kaylin, with his unsettling talent for digital infiltration, added Sadie, a new temporary employee, to the company's roster. He procured a uniform, an ID badge cloned from a real worker, and a story. The following Friday morning, I pushed a cleaning cart through the gleaming marble lobby of the Foundation's headquarters, head down, invisible. The security guard barely glanced at my forged pass. I took the service elevator to the 12th floor. Marcus's office was a monument to tasteful power, and there, on the wall behind his monstrous oak desk, was the family photograph from the park. Our smiling faces felt like a grotesque mockery. I knew this room. I knew that behind a bland landscape painting was a wall safe. Marcus was arrogant, sentimental in his cruelty. The combination would be Zion's birthday. With the painting removed, I punched in 1703. The light blinked green. The safe contained stacks of cash, deeds for properties I'd never heard of, passports, and a folder of documents detailing the transfer of Laurelwood Academy's land, city-donated, meant for children, into a private holding company owned by Finch and Marcus. It was corruption, but not murder. The poison wasn't there. Then I heard voices in the hall, Marcus's laugh and a lighter one, feminine. Sasha, his executive assistant, a woman whose lingering touches and admirable glances I had foolishly dismissed. I ducked behind a large leather sofa just as they entered. They didn't see me. "A brilliant performance at the funeral, truly," Sasha said, her voice a purr. "Even Alistair was impressed. He said your grief was palpable."
Marcus chuckled, the sound rich and self-satisfied. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquor. The sickly little anchor is finally cut loose. A few more weeks of that expensive medicine was draining the estate dry. Now the money flows. We flow. My fingernails bit into my palms. Sickly little anchor. "And the wife?" Sasha asked. "Gone. Probably having a hysterical breakdown in a ditch somewhere. No one will question it. Grief does strange things." He sighed, a theatrical sound. "A pity. She was decorative, but weak. Once the insurance and inheritance clear, we'll be on that beach in Belize, darling. You just make sure the last of the medicine is disposed of with the biohazard pickup tomorrow. No traces." The medicine. They hadn't destroyed it yet. Arrogance. They believed they'd already won. I stayed hidden, a statue of ice, until they left for lunch. Before I slipped out, I took from my pocket Zion's favorite green toy soldier, the one he'd carried everywhere. I placed it squarely in the center of Marcus's immaculate desk blotter. A ghost came here, and she knows. Back at the safe house, Kaylin and I listened to the audio I'd captured. His face was a storm. It's good, it's damning, but it's still our word against theirs in a soundproof room. We need a public unraveling. We devised a 2-pronged attack: psychological warfare and forced betrayal. Kaylin had already hacked into the smart home system of our house on Willow Lane. That night, we watched on a laptop feed as Marcus, alone and drinking heavily, picked up Zion's toy soldier from his desk. His face was puzzled, then wary. At midnight, we made the lights in the living room flicker wildly. We saw him jump, checking switches. Later, we dropped the thermostat to near freezing. As he shivered in bed, we played, through the ceiling speakers, a faint looping clip of Zion's laughter from an old birthday video. Marcus shot upright, his eyes wide, scanning the dark room. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice tight. We turned the sound off. The next night, we played the audio of Zion's weak, pained whimpers from the recorder as Marcus showered. The echo in the tiled bathroom was spectral, haunting. He stumbled out, dripping and pale, screaming at the empty air. His calls to Sasha became frantic, accusatory. "Stop your games, you stupid woman. This isn't funny." The crack in their alliance had begun. The catalyst was the Evergreen Foundation's annual Bright Futures Gala, a black tie event where Alistair Finch was to present Marcus with a newly created Pillar of Strength Award for his dedication to family and community in the face of unimaginable loss. The hypocrisy was nauseating. Kaylin infiltrated the Gala's AV system. They had a planned tribute video for Zion. We had a different edit. The night of the gala, we watched from a rented van parked nearby, our screens patched into the hotel security cameras. Marcus looked terrible, haggard, twitchy, his eyes darting. Sasha, on his arm, looked strained. Finch was the picture of avuncular benevolence. When Marcus took the stage to accept his award, the ballroom erupted in sympathetic applause. He began his speech, his voice trembling with performed emotion. "My son, Zion, was my light." I nodded to Kaylin. The massive screen behind Marcus flickered to static, then a blinding solid red. Blood-red text scrawled across it, as if written by an invisible hand. "I know what you did." The applause died. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd.
Marcus froze, staring at the screen, his face draining of all color. Then, through the concert hall speakers, his own voice boomed, clear and cold, the recording from his office. The sickly little anchor is finally cut loose. A few more weeks of that expensive medicine was draining the estate dry. Now the money flows. We flow. Gasps, shouts, chairs scraping. Sasha fainted, sliding to the floor in a heap of sequined fabric. Finch shot to his feet, his benign mask shattered into rage and panic. On stage, Marcus stammered, grabbing the microphone. "It's a fake, a malicious lie. Someone is trying to ruin us." But the crowd was turning, a tide of shock and disgust. Camera phones were raised, recording his meltdown. The final blow came when he saw Finch, red-faced, gesturing violently to security, clearly trying to distance himself, to make Marcus the sole scapegoat. Betrayal flashed in Marcus's eyes, sharp and lethal. "You!" Marcus screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Finch, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent room. "You planned it. The poison, the dosage. It was your debt, your land deal. If I go down, you're coming with me, you sanctimonious bastard." The chaos was complete. The Gala became front-page news. The video of Marcus's accusation went viral. But we weren't done. Wounded animals are dangerous, and they still had resources. Using untraceable burner phones, we played them against each other. We texted Finch, posing as Marcus, threatening to release the land transfer documents if he was smuggled out of the city. We texted Marcus, posing as Finch's man, offering a boat escape if he brought all evidence to be destroyed at the Foundation's old Riverside warehouse. They took the bait. Kaylin had a trusted contact in the Major Crimes Unit, Detective Rivera, a woman he'd worked with before. She was skeptical but listened to the recordings. She agreed to have a team stand by to get a confession on official wire. At 2 a.m., under a cloak of pouring rain, Kaylin and I were hidden in the rafters of the dilapidated warehouse, watching through night vision cameras. Finch arrived first with 2 armed men, leaving them outside. He clutched a briefcase, his face hard. Minutes later, Marcus arrived, disheveled and wild-eyed. "Where's the boat?" Marcus demanded, desperation fraying his voice. "Boat?" Finch sneered. "After your little performance, you're a liability. The documents, give them to me, and your death will be quick." The betrayal was instant and mutual. Their whispered conspiracy in doctors' offices and oak-paneled rooms erupted in shouted accusations in the dripping, rusty dark. "You got me the poison," Marcus yelled. "You called Zion a regrettable means to an end." "You administered it," Finch roared back. "You were his father. You held him down." Every word was captured by police microphones. The trap was sprung. Rivera's voice boomed through a megaphone from outside. "This is the police. You are surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Panic. Finch pulled a small, sleek pistol. Marcus lunged. They grappled, a frantic, ugly struggle, until the guns skittered across the concrete floor. Marcus, younger and stronger, pinned Finch, raining blows down on him. It was then Marcus looked up, his eyes scanning the shadows. They found us in the rafters. The recognition was slow, then incendiary. "Amara!" The roar was pure, undiluted hatred. He abandoned Finch and charged for the metal stairs. "Go!" Kaylin shoved me toward a roof access door. We burst out into the lashing rain. Marcus was close behind, a metal pipe in his hand now. He swung at Kaylin, catching his arm with a sickening crack. Kaylin cried out, collapsing. Marcus grabbed me by the hair, yanking me back, pressing the cold edge of the pipe against my throat. He dragged me toward the roof's edge, using me as a shield against the police now emerging onto the rooftop. "One more step and she goes over," he screamed. Below, the black, swollen river churned. In that suspended moment, with the rain needling my face and the metal biting my skin, fear vanished. I saw Zion's face. I saw Vanya's. A profound, glacial calm settled over me. I slammed my head back, crunching into his nose. He yelped, his grip loosening. I drove my elbow into his ribs, then stomped down with all my weight on his instep. As he buckled, I twisted free. He lunged again, but his foot caught on a loose roof vent. With a final, furious snarl, Marcus Thorne pitched backward, over the low parapet, and vanished into the roaring darkness below. The silence that followed was broken only by the rain and the shouted orders of the police. They found him 20 minutes later, alive but shattered, caught on a jagged outcrop of rocks, both legs crushed and bleeding. The aftermath was a media circus. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the warehouse confession, the financial paper trail. Marcus, from a prison hospital bed, tried to bargain, but the DA had everything. He was convicted on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud. The sentence was life without parole, a living death in a cell. Alistair Finch, his legacy in tatters, suffered a catastrophic stroke during his arraignment. He survived, but was left partially paralyzed, unable to speak, condemned to spend his remaining years in a prison infirmary, a monument to his own decay. Sasha, attempting to flee the country with a suitcase of jewels bought with foundation money, was arrested. She turned state evidence in a heartbeat, but still received a 20-year sentence. Kaylin's arm healed, though it would always ache in the cold. My own wounds, the cut on my neck, the deeper ones inside, began slowly to scar over. The Thorne family fortune, tainted by blood, was recovered through arduous legal battles. I could not keep it. With Kaylin's help, I established the Zion Thorne House, a foundation and safe haven for at-risk and abused children. We bought an old, sturdy brick building and filled it with light, books, toys, and trained staff. In the lobby, we placed 2 photographs, one of Zion, grinning with his trophy, and one of Vanya Petrova, her kind eyes smiling. A small plaque honored her courage. One evening, 6 months after the trial, as a soft golden light bathed the new community garden at Zion House, I felt a presence. I turned. Kaylin stood there, holding 2 mugs of tea. He didn't speak, he just offered one, his steady gaze saying everything words could not. We had walked through hell together. We had not emerged unscathed, but we had emerged. And in the laughter of the children now playing where silence and sorrow once reigned, I heard a faint, beautiful echo of my own son's joy. It was not an ending, but a different kind of beginning. A life built not on the ashes of grief, but on the stubborn, defiant hope that had risen from them. I was no longer just a victim, a wife, a mourner. I was Amara, and I was still here. The Zion Thorne House opened its doors on a blustery October morning, the air crisp with the promise of change. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small, just me, Kaylin, a few social workers we'd hired, and a local reporter Kaylin trusted. There were no politicians, no society photographers. This was not for spectacle. It was a promise, carved in stone and fresh paint. A small girl with wary eyes and a fading bruise on her cheek was the first to cross the threshold, her hand clutching that of a young, exhausted-looking caseworker. She looked up at the bright mural in the entryway, a tree with countless branches, each leaf bearing the handwritten name of a donor or a wish from a child, and her grip tightened, but she stepped inside. That first step felt more significant than any court verdict. In the weeks that followed, the house filled with sounds I thought I'd never hear again. The tentative scuffle of sneakers in the hall, the low murmur of a patient tutor, the sudden explosive laughter of a child learning to play again. It was a balm and an agony all at once. Every laugh was Zion's. Every shy smile was a ghost of his. But slowly, the ghosts became less like hauntings and more like companions. His spirit was in this place, I told myself, and it was a spirit of protection, not of loss. Kalen was my anchor. He handled the foundation's finances, its security, its intricate dance with city bureaucracy, all while continuing his investigative work. Our relationship was a complex, unspoken thing, forged in fire, bound by a terrible secret and a shared purpose. There was an easy comfort between us, a shorthand born of surviving a war. Sometimes, late at night over shared paperwork, our hands would brush and a current would pass. Simple and profound, but we never spoke of it. The shadow of the past was too long, my heart still a field of fragile new growth. One afternoon, 3 months after the opening, I was in my modest office reviewing files when Kalen knocked on the doorframe. His expression was unreadable, a blend of concern and professional focus. "You have a visitor at the front desk. She's asking for you specifically." "A donor?" I asked, standing. "I don't think so. She asked for Amara Thorne, the mother of Zion. She's older, dressed simply. She looks nervous." A cold trickle, a relic of old fears, traced my spine. I followed him to the reception area. The woman waiting was indeed elderly, perhaps in her early 70s. She wore a neat, faded coat and clutched a worn leather handbag. Her eyes, a pale blue, were sharp and filled with a deep, unsettling sorrow. "Mrs. Thorne?" she asked, her voice thin but clear. "Yes. How can I help you?" She glanced at Kalen, then back at me. "Might we speak in private? My name is Eleanor Vance. I am, Alistair Finch's housekeeper, or I was, for 42 years. The name hit me like a physical blow. The air left the room. Kalen stepped closer, a protective shift in his stance. "I have nothing to say about that man," I said, my voice hardening. "Please," she whispered, and the plea in her voice was real, desperate. "It's not about him, not directly. It's about the land, the Laurelwood land, and about another boy, a long time ago." Kalen and I exchanged a look. The Laurelwood land was the prize Marcus and Finch killed for. We assumed it was simple greed, real estate development. Another boy. "Come to my office," I said, my curiosity a dark, unwelcome pull. In the office, Eleanor Vance sat stiffly on the edge of a chair. She refused tea. Her hands, knotted with arthritis, trembled as she opened her bag and pulled out a small, yellowed envelope. "I've carried this guilt for decades," she began, not meeting our eyes. "I was young when I started with Mr. Finch. Well, with his father, actually. The family, they were always powerful. But Alistair, he was different. Colder. There was an accident when he was a young man, just taking over the foundation. A boy died at one of their summer camps, a drowning. It was ruled a tragic accident. The boy was from a poor family, a scholarship recipient. The family was compensated quietly." She slid a photograph from the envelope. It was a grainy, black and white picture of a group of boys at a lakeside camp. One boy, smiling broadly, had his arm around another who looked shyly at the ground. She pointed a gnarled finger at the shy boy. Peter Reed. He was 10. "What does this have to do with Laurelwood?" Kalen asked, his journalist's instinct engaged. "The camp was on a parcel of land adjacent to what became the Laurelwood School grounds," Eleanor said. "After Peter died, the foundation acquired that land from the city for expansion and memorial. A year later, the first Laurelwood building went up. The Finches made a fortune in donations. But I was there. I heard the arguments between Alistair and his father. The boy, Peter, he'd stumbled onto something. He'd seen surveyors, documents. He was a clever boy, asked too many questions about why the foundation wanted that specific swampy lakefront." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I never had proof, only a sick feeling. And then, your son." She looked at me then, and her eyes flooded with tears. "When I saw the news, when they said Mr. Finch was involved with a child's death again for land, I couldn't stay silent anymore. The Laurelwood deal wasn't the first. It's a a pattern. The foundation, the charitable work, it's a front. They identify city-owned land designated for community use, parks, schools, clinics. They find a way to control it, often through tragedy or scandal that devalues it. Then they acquire it for pennies, repurpose it, and sell it for millions. Your son's inheritance, that was just a piece of it, a big piece, but just one. The room tilted. Marcus and Finch's conspiracy was deeper, darker, and older than we'd imagined. Zion wasn't an isolated victim of a greedy father. He was the latest sacrifice on an altar of generational corruption. "Why are you telling us this now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Because it's not over," she said firmly. "Alistair is in prison, but the foundation remains. The board is filled with his friends, his proxies. The Laurelwood land deal is frozen, but it's not undone. And there are other properties, other projects. The machine is still running." And she hesitated, fear flickering across her face. "I believe they know I've spoken out. My pension was cut off. I've had hang-up calls. A man sitting in a car outside my apartment. I'm an old woman. I have nowhere else to go with this." She placed the envelope on my desk. Inside were more photos, copies of old foundation memos with suggestive phrasing, a list of properties acquired by a shell company called Evergreen Holdings over the last 40 years. It was a trail of breadcrumbs leading into a very dark forest. After Eleanor left, under the discreet escort of one of our security staff to a safe location Kaylin arranged, we sat in silence, the weight of her revelation pressing down. "This is bigger than we thought," Kaylin finally said, staring at the documents. "We cut off the head, but the body is still twitching, and it's wealthy, connected, and ruthless." A new kind of resolve settled within me, colder and more focused than the rage that had driven me before. This wasn't just about justice for Zion anymore. It was about exposing a system that fed on the vulnerable. It was about Peter Reed and whoever came before him and whoever might come after if this was allowed to stand. "We need to find Peter Reed's family," I said. "And we need to look into every property on this list," Kaylin added, a familiar, determined light in his eyes. "This is what I do, Amara. Let me dig." The next few weeks were a tense, covert operation running parallel to the daily life of Zion House. Kaylin, using his network of sources and his formidable research skills, began disentangling the web of Evergreen Holdings. I, using the quiet legitimacy of the foundation director, began making discreet inquiries. Finding Peter Reed's family was harder than we expected. They had moved away decades ago, their grief compounded by a suspiciously smooth financial settlement that required their silence. Kaylin eventually tracked down a younger sister, now a retired teacher, living in a small town 2 states over. Her name was Margaret. When I called her, her voice was guarded. When I mentioned Peter's name and the Finch Foundation, the guard turned to ice. "We have nothing to say. That chapter is closed." "It's not closed, Margaret," I said softly. My own pain gave my words a weight I couldn't fake. "My name is Amara Thorne. My son Zion was 8 years old. Alistair Finch and my husband killed him for land, too. I think they may have done the same to Peter." There was a long, crackling silence on the line. Then a sob, ragged and old. "He loved that camp," she whispered. "He was so excited to go. He wrote us a letter the day before it happened. He said the big boss, Mr. Finch's son, was there, arguing with the surveyors by the old creek. Peter thought it was an adventure. He was going to follow them, be a spy." She broke down completely. "They said he wandered off, that he couldn't swim well. But Peter was a fish. He won a swimming ribbon at the Y." We arranged to meet. Margaret gave us the faded, water-stained letter from her brother. In a child's scrawl, it mentioned the secret maps and the angry men. It wasn't proof, but it was a thread. Kalin, cross-referencing dates, found that the land survey for the Laurelwood Annex was filed the week after Peter died. Meanwhile, the list of properties was a revelation, a community garden in a low-income neighborhood that mysteriously failed after a toxic waste scare, traces of which were later debunked. Now, a parking lot for a luxury condominium built by a Finch-connected developer. A youth center that lost its funding after a foundation audit questioned its management. The land later sold to a private school. The pattern was clear: identify, destabilize, acquire, profit. But the machine was aware it was being probed. Kalen's digital trails started to get muddy. His sources grew nervous. One, a clerk at the city records office, called him in a panic, saying his boss had been asked to flag any inquiries about Evergreen Holdings. Then, Zion House received its first official visit. A pair of well-dressed men from the City Charitable Oversight Board arrived unannounced. They asked polite but pointed questions about our funding, our licensing, our operational stability. They took extensive notes. Their eyes were not friendly. "They're looking for leverage," Kalin said grimly after they left, "a way to pressure you, to discredit the foundation. If they can shut down Zion House or tie you up in legal battles, you're less of a threat." The threat crystallized a week later. I was working late when the phone on my desk rang, the internal line. "Amara, it's Ben at the front desk." Ben was our night security guard, a gentle giant of a man. "There's a delivery for you. Hand-delivered. Guy just left it and took off. It doesn't look right."
I went downstairs. On the reception desk lay a simple white cardboard box. There was no label. With a sense of dread, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on tissue paper, was a child's toy, a cheap plastic magnifying glass, and beside it, a fresh white magnolia blossom, its petals already beginning to brown at the edges. A symbol of our old home, of the tree I'd climbed to escape, a symbol of Zion's room. It was a message, a threat. We see you. We know where you are. We know what you cherish. My blood ran cold, but the fear was quickly subsumed by a boiling fury. They were threatening not just me, but the sanctuary I'd built, the children within it. "We need to move faster," I told Kalin that night, showing him the box. "And we need to be smarter. We can't just expose them with documents. We need a witness from inside. We need to make them turn on each other, like Marcus and Finch did." The opportunity came from an unexpected direction. Sasha, Marcus's former assistant, now inmate number 46892 at the Women's Correctional Facility. She had written to me, a rambling, pleading letter full of self-pity and excuses. I'd thrown it away. But now I saw a potential tool. She's vain, scared, and she knows how the Foundation operates on a day-to-day basis, Kalin mused. She might have information she didn't even realize was important, or she might be willing to trade it for something. Visiting Sasha in prison was a surreal descent into a world of concrete and resigned misery. She sat across from me in the visitor's room, her beauty faded under the harsh lights, her eyes darting and hungry. "Amara," she said, attempting a pathetic smile, "I'm so sorry for everything. I was under his spell, you know? Marcus, he just had this power." "Save it, Sasha," my voice flat. "I'm not here for your apology. I'm here because the people you and Marcus worked for are still out there, and they're threatening my home, the Foundation's board. Who runs it now? Who handled the dirty work after Finch went down?" She blinked, surprised by the directness. Fear flashed in her eyes. "I can't. It's dangerous." "More dangerous than in here?" I gestured to the room. "I can't get you out, but I can make your life in here marginally better. A guaranteed transfer to a safer unit.
access to better commissary funds, or, I leaned forward, I can let it be known that you're the one feeding me information about the Foundation's ongoing activities. I wonder how long you'd last then." It was a brutal gambit. She paled, her bravado crumbling. She was a survivor, first and foremost. "There's a man," she whispered, leaning in. "Jonathan Price. He was on the board, but quiet, always in the background. After Finch was arrested, Price became the acting chairman. He's the one who retired the old housekeeper. He's the one who signs the checks for the lawyers. He and Finch, they were close, real close. Price's construction firm got the contracts for every Finch development for 20 years. Jonathan Price. The name meant nothing to the public, but Kaylin's research lit up. Price was a wealthy, low-profile developer, a philanthropist on several museum boards, the perfect frontman. "What does he want?" I asked. "The Laurelwood deal," Sasha said, her voice dropping even lower. "It's in limbo, but the option to buy is still in the Foundation's name. It expires in 6 months. If they don't close by then, the city reclaims the land. He needs it to go through. It's the cornerstone of a whole new development plan, luxury townhomes, a private park. He's invested millions already in soft costs. If it falls through, he's ruined." So the pressure point was time, and Price was desperate. "One more thing," Sasha added, a sly, knowing look returning to her eyes. "Price has a son, a disappointment, I heard. Got into some trouble years ago, drugs, was sent away to get clean. The son is back now, trying to get into the family business. Price is trying to keep him clean, keep him in line. The son's name is Leo. A weak link, a potential point of entry. Kaylin found Leo Price easily. He was in his late 20s, living in a trendy but not outrageously expensive apartment, working a vague business development job at his father's company. Social media showed a young man trying hard to project an image of success, but the eyes in the photos held a familiar emptiness, the look of someone trying to outrun a shadow. We devised a plan. It was risky, theatrical, and relied on human weakness. Using the information from Sasha and his own digging, Kaylin crafted a dossier. It contained copies of Eleanor Vance's documents, the story of Peter Reed, the pattern of land grabs, and a detailed, damning timeline of the Laurelwood deal, highlighting Jonathan Price's central role post-Finch. It also included a carefully worded anonymous cover letter, suggesting that this information was about to be sent to the state attorney general, the IRS, and several major newspapers, unless certain conditions were met. The condition was simple. Jonathan Price would publicly petition the city to allow the Laurelwood land to be transferred, at no cost, to the Zion Thorn House for permanent use as a children's community center and park. He would dissolve the Evergreen Foundation's claim. But we didn't send it to Jonathan Price. We sent it to his son, Leo. The package arrived at Leo's apartment by courier. We watched from a cafe across the street as he collected it. An hour later, he stormed out of the building, sped off in his sports car, presumably towards his father's office. The trap was set. We were betting on 2 things: that Leo, seeking his father's approval, but also resentful of his control, would confront him rather than quietly hand over the dossier, and that Jonathan Price, faced with his son knowing the full, sordid truth of the family business, would panic. We didn't have to wait long. That evening, Kaylin's contact in the police department, Detective Rivera, called. "You've been busy," she said, her tone a mix of admiration and worry. "We just got a very interesting 911 call, a domestic disturbance at the Price residence. Units on scene report the son, Leo Price, is hysterical, yelling about corruption and murder. The father is barricaded in his study, refusing to speak. The son is claiming he has proof of illegal activities tied to the Finch murder case. He mentioned the Thorn case and a drowning." Kaylin and I listened on a police scanner as the scene unfolded. Leo, in his rage and fear, was shouting everything to anyone who would listen. The land grabs, the cover-ups, his father's intimate involvement with Finch. It was a public, messy, and utterly damning meltdown. By the next morning, it was the lead story. Scion exposes father's alleged corruption tie to Finch murder case. The dossier, which Leo had foolishly left open on his laptop, was quickly obtained by reporters. The dominoes began to fall. The Attorney General announced an investigation into the Evergreen Foundation and Price Development. City council members, their names suddenly appearing in connection with favorable zoning votes, scrambled to denounce Price.
In the face of this, Jonathan Price's lawyers orchestrated a swift, quiet surrender. He resigned from all boards and, through back channels, offered a deal. In exchange for reduced charges focused on financial crimes, he would sign over all foundation assets not already seized to a court-appointed trust, with the Laurel Woodland specifically deeded to the Zion Thornhouse. He would also provide a full, sworn statement detailing the foundation's activities for the past 30 years. It was a victory. A tangible, monumental one. The land Zion died for would become a place of life. Peter Reed's story would be heard. The machine was being dismantled, bolt by corrupt bolt. The day the papers were signed was overcast but mild. I stood on the empty field that was to be the future Zion's grove, the deed in my hand. Kaylin stood beside me. "It's done," I said, not with triumph, but with a deep, weary finality. "This part is," he replied. "There's always more work." I looked at him, really looked at him. The streaks of gray in his dark hair that hadn't been there a year ago, the lines of stress and compassion around his eyes. He had fought my battles with a ferocity that went beyond friendship, beyond debt. "Kaylin," I began, the words unfamiliar on my tongue. "All this time, I haven't been able to—" He shook his head, a small, understanding smile touching his lips. He took my hand, the one not holding the deed. His grip was warm, solid, real. "You don't have to say anything, Amara. I know. We have time." And for the first time since the lilies filled my house with the smell of death, I believed that. We had time. Not to forget, not to replace what was lost, but to build something new in the spaces between the scars. As we turned to walk back to the car, a shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, eliminating the empty field. At the far edge, near a cluster of old oaks, I saw a flicker of movement. A small, familiar silhouette, just for an instant, waving. Then it was gone, leaving only the dancing light and the whisper of the grass through the wind. He was at peace. And finally, so was I. The signing of the deed was not an end, but a new kind of beginning, one mired in bureaucracy, soil tests, and architectural plans. The field that was to become Zion's Grove was a blank slate of mud and stubborn weeds. But to me, it was already sacred ground. We held a small, quiet ceremony with the children from Zion House, each planting a sapling, oak, maple, magnolia, along the future perimeter. Their small hands patting the earth felt like a blessing. Life settled into a rhythm that was both strange and soothing. Zion House hummed with purposeful activity. Kaylin's role evolved from protector and investigator to a de facto chief operating officer, his sharp mind navigating budgets and building codes with the same intensity he'd once used to track corrupt men. Our partnership was the bedrock of it all, a quiet, constant force. The unspoken thing between us remained unspoken, but it had taken root, growing in the shared looks over grant proposals, the easy silence during late-night work sessions, the way his hand would find the small of my back in a crowded room, a steadying point of contact. Then the first letter arrived. It was slipped under the door of my office at Zion House, a plain white envelope with my name typed on the front. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Mrs. Thorne, your victory is impressive, but you are pruning branches, not pulling up roots. The tree is older and deeper than you know. Peter Reed was not the first. Ask about the fire at the Brookside Community Center, 1978. Ask about the chemicals in the soil at the Oakview Playground. The foundation had many hands. Some are still very clean. A friend. I stared at the words, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Kalen's face was grim when I showed him. It could be a crank, someone who followed the trial, wants to feel important. Or it's someone who knows something, I countered. The details, they're specific. Brookside, Oakview, those names weren't in Eleanor's documents. We decided to dig, but quietly. The public victory had made Zion House visible, a target for both admiration and, apparently, cryptic warnings. Kalen, using his old journalistic methods under a layer of discretion, began looking into the two incidents. The Brookside Community Center fire was indeed in 1978. It had been ruled an electrical fault, a tragedy that claimed the life of a night custodian. The land, after sitting vacant for years due to environmental concerns, was sold to a private developer. The company was a subsidiary of a larger firm that had done business with Price Development. A thin thread, but a thread. The Oakview Playground case was more sinister. In the mid-'80s, a cluster of childhood leukemia cases in a low-income neighborhood were linked to toxic chemicals found in a city park. The source was never officially determined, though illegal dumping was suspected. The park was condemned. The land was later acquired by the city at a reduced price for a new sanitation department depot. The paperwork showed the acquisition was fast-tracked on the recommendation of a city planning committee whose chairman was a major donor to the Evergreen Foundation. It was the same pattern, but messier, bloodier, with collateral damage that spread wider than a single targeted child. The letter was right. We'd stopped a specific, monstrous plan, but we'd only glimpsed the ecosystem that allowed it to exist. The second letter came a week later, this time to Kalen's apartment. Mr. Sable, your research is competent, but you look for contracts and deeds. Look for the doctors. Ask about the late Dr. Evans. His cousins were not all by blood. The medicine has many distributors. A friend. Dr. Evans, the family physician, Finch's distant cousin, who had signed Zion's death certificate. He had died of a reported heart attack a month after Finch's arrest, a footnote in the scandal. We assumed it was stress or guilt. Now the phrase, the medicine has many distributors, rang with horrific implication. He's suggesting a network. Kalen's voice was low. Not just land, medical corruption. Evans might have been supplying more than just a favorable diagnosis for Zion. The thought was nauseating. Had other children, other vulnerable people, been victims of calibrated medicine for someone else's gain? Was the poison that killed my son part of a larger hidden trade? Our anonymous correspondent was not a friend. They were a provocateur, dangling threads of deeper horror, pulling us into a darker maze. But we couldn't ignore it. We began a parallel shadow investigation. Publicly, we were consumed with building Zion House. Privately, we were following a trail of medical anomalies, cross-referencing doctors who had served on foundation health committees with malpractice suits that had been quietly settled, with pharmaceutical company donations. It was exhausting, paranoid work. I started seeing patterns in everything. The friendly new donor asking too many questions about our security, the unexplained glitch in our computer network that Kalen said was a sophisticated probe, the feeling of being watched that would come over me in the empty garden at dusk.
The strain began to show. I woke from nightmares not of Zion, but of faceless children in hospital beds, of smiling doctors holding syringes. My temper, once honed to a sharp, purposeful edge, became frayed. I snapped at a well-meaning volunteer, then dissolved into apologies.
Kaylin watched me with concerned eyes, giving me space but always present. The breaking point came with the third letter. It was left not for me or Kaylin, but on the pillow of a 10-year-old boy at Zion House named Miguel, a sweet, anxious child who had just begun to sleep through the night. It was found by a night attendant during rounds. It was a photograph, a grainy, long-lens picture of me and Kaylin walking in the unfinished grove, deep in conversation. On the back, typed, "Even in your sanctuary, you are not safe. Are they?" It was a declaration of war, and it had crossed a line that no threat to me ever could. They had violated the one sacred space I had created, terrorized a child in his bed. Rage, clean and scorching, burned away the fear and the paranoia. This was no longer about following clues. This was about drawing out the enemy. "We stop investigating," I told Kaylin, my voice terrifyingly calm. "We do nothing. We focus entirely on the grove. Publicly, visibly. We make it the biggest story in the city." He understood immediately. "Bait. Bait," I confirmed. "If they want to stop us from looking into the past, they'll try to sabotage the future. We'll let them try, and we'll be waiting." We went very public. We launched a capital campaign for Zion's Grove, a legacy of hope. We held press conferences with the mayor, who was eager for positive press after the Finch scandal. We gave tours to news crews. We plastered the city with renderings of the beautiful park and community center. We made it the symbol of redemption after corruption. And we fortified. Kaylin, with resources from the foundation, installed a state-of-the-art redundant security system across the entire Zion House and Grove property. Motion sensors, hidden cameras, silent alarms. He hired a small, trusted security team, off-duty police officers he'd vetted personally. We made it a fortress, disguised as a haven. The waiting was the hardest part. Weeks passed. The letter stopped. The groundbreaking for the Grove's main community hall was scheduled. The anticipation was a live wire. I knew they would move. The Grove's success was a permanent monument to their failure, a daily rebuke. They couldn't allow it. They struck on the night before the groundbreaking. It was 3 a.m. The silent alarm from the Grove's utility shed tripped. The security feed showed two figures in dark clothing, carrying canisters, cutting the lock. Kaylin and I were already awake, watching from the monitor in his apartment above the tailor's shop. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady. "Go," I said. He was already moving, speaking into his radio to the security team converging from their posts. Police were automatically alerted, but Kaylin was closest. I watched the screen as he sprinted across the dark field, a shadow against the darker earth. The two intruders had opened the canisters, gasoline from the way they sloshed, and were dousing the foundation forms and the stacked lumber for the new building. Kaylin didn't shout. He simply appeared at the edge of the shed's light, a solid, imposing silhouette. "It's over," he called out, his voice carrying on the still night. "The police are here." The two figures froze. One, taller, made a break for the tree line. The other, younger and clumsier, fumbled with his canister, then turned and ran in the opposite direction, straight towards the old oak grove at the back of the property. Kaylin took off after the second. On the camera feed, I lost sight of them in the trees. My breath caught. Then a scuffle, a cry, silence. "Kaylin?" I whispered into the radio. Static. Then his voice, breathless. "Got him. He's just a kid, scared out of his mind." The police arrived seconds later, apprehending the first man by the road. The second, a gaunt young man no older than 20, was sitting on the ground under the oaks, sobbing, with Kaylin standing guard over him. At the police station, their stories unraveled quickly. They were hired hands. The older one, a convicted arsonist, gave up his employer for a plea deal, a man named Roland Gage. The name meant nothing to us, but when the police brought him in, he was exactly the kind of man we'd expected. Mid-50s, expensively dressed, a lawyer with a boutique firm that specialized in corporate risk management. A cleaner, a fixer. He sat in the interrogation room, his face a bland mask of polite confusion. My clients have been subjected to a vicious smear campaign. This is clearly an attempt to further harass them by staging an attack. These men are lying. But the arsonist had proof. A burner phone with text messages, a cash payment with serial numbers that were traced to a shell account managed by Gage's firm. The pressure mounted. Gage, facing real jail time for conspiracy to commit arson, began to bargain. He wouldn't talk about the past, he wouldn't name the clients who had hired him to stop the Grove, but he offered something else. He said, his smugness finally cracking under the strain. The one who's been writing to you, the friend, I know who it is. I can give him to you in exchange for immunity on this unfortunate misunderstanding. We took the deal. We didn't need Gage to tell us about the past. We were piecing it together ourselves. But we needed the provocateur neutralized. The name he gave us was a shock. Lydia Evans. Dr. Evans's widow. We found her in a modest, well-kept house in a quiet suburb, a world away from the Finches and Prices. She was a small, neat woman in her 70s with intelligent, sorrowful eyes. She let us in without surprise, as if she'd been expecting us. The living room was a shrine to her late husband, photos of a smiling, avuncular man at medical conferences, receiving community service awards. "I knew you'd come eventually," she said, her voice soft. "Once you got Roland. He was always the weak one, all bluster." "The letters," I said, not unkindly. "Why?" She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a threat, but a reflection of my own pain, tinged with a different, more complicated guilt. "My husband was a good man," she began, twisting a wedding band on her finger. "A healer, but he was weak in other ways. He loved the prestige, the proximity to men like Alastair Finch and Price. They used that. For years, they used him. He would smooth over diagnoses for their workers' compensation cases. He would provide glowing health reports for properties they wanted to sell. It was small, he told himself, harmless." She took a shivering breath. And then, about 15 years ago, it changed. The requests became more specific. He was asked to prescribe certain regimens for certain patients connected to foundation interests. He told me he didn't ask questions. The money was significant. It paid for our daughter's medical school. It paid for this house. Her eyes filled with tears. "When your son died, and I saw Alastair and your husband on the news, something in my husband broke. He realized what he'd been a part of. Not just paperwork, not just smoothing over. He was a part of that. He became paranoid, withdrawn. Then he had his heart attack." She said the words with bitter emphasis. "You think he was killed," Kaylin stated. "I know he was," she whispered. "He was about to talk. To you, to the police, I don't know. He had started writing things down. Names, dates, medications. They must have known." "And the letters?" I prompted. "A warning," she said, looking directly at me, "and a penance. I couldn't go to the police. I have a daughter, grandchildren. These people, they don't stop. But I couldn't let it lie. I thought if I pointed you in the right direction, you, with your resources, your motivation, you might finish what my husband couldn't. You might pull up the roots. And you needed to know the truth. The whole truth, not just for your boy, but for all the others, the ones in the files my husband hid." She led us to a study, to a false panel in the wainscoting. Behind it was a fireproof lockbox. Inside were not just notes, but vials of pills with handwritten labels, copies of altered medical records, and a ledger. It was a doctor's confession, detailing a clandestine network that used medical authority to disable, discredit, or quietly eliminate obstacles to the foundation's goals. A troublesome tenant organizer prescribed sedatives that caused a debilitating fall. a city councilman's aide diagnosed with a rare, career-ending stress disorder, an environmental activist whose allergy medication was subtly switched, leading to a severe, public reaction that ruined her credibility. And there, among the records, was a file on a young camp counselor from 1978, a man who had questioned the safety of the Brookside Center's wiring after the fire. Dr. Evans had diagnosed him with acute paranoid psychosis based on a single manipulated evaluation, effectively ending his advocacy and his career. It was a weaponization of trust, more insidious than any poison. It explained how the Foundation had operated with such impunity for so long. They didn't just create accidents, they manufactured consent, disarmed opposition, and pathologized truth-tellers. Lydia Evans's penance was complete. We had the evidence. With Kalen's guidance and Detective Rivera's renewed zeal, the ledger became the key that unlocked a dozen cold cases, a wave of indictments that swept up retired officials, compliant physicians, and a handful of respectable businessmen who had been the true beneficiaries of the Finch machine. The groundbreaking for Zion's Grove proceeded the next day, not as a target, but as a triumph. The sun was bright. Children from the house shrieked with laughter as they helped with ceremonial shovels. The mayor gave a speech about resilience. I stood beside Kalen, not listening to the platitudes, feeling the solid, sun-warmed earth under my feet. Later, when the crowds had gone, we walked through the marked-out paths of the future park. The silence was peaceful, earned. "It's really over now, isn't it?" I said, more statement than question. "The war is," Kalen said, taking my hand. His palm was calloused, real. "The work isn't. The grove, the house, it's just beginning." I stopped and turned to face him. The late afternoon light gilded his features, softening the sharp lines of worry. The ghosts were still there. Zion's smile, Vanya's pleading eyes, Peter Reed's faded photo from a faded photo. But they no longer screamed. They were memories, woven into the fabric of this new purpose. "Kalen," I said, my voice clear in the quiet, "all this time, I've been living in a story about loss and vengeance. I don't want to live there anymore." He didn't smile, but his eyes, those deep, watchful eyes, softened in a way I had never seen before. He cupped my face with his free hand, his thumb brushing my cheek. "Then don't," he said simply. "The next chapter is ours to write, together." And there, in the middle of the field that held the bones of the past and the seeds of the future, he kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion born of desperate times, but one of promise, of a quiet, steadfast love that had been growing in the shadows all along. It tasted of earth and hope and a peace so hard-won it felt unbreakable. When we parted, the world had shifted on its axis, settling into a new, right alignment. In the distance, by the newly planted magnolia sapling, I saw a flicker. A small boy in a superhero shirt giving a thumbs up before dissolving into the dappled light. A blessing, not a haunting. I squeezed Kalen's hand. "Together," I agreed. And as we walked back toward the house, toward the sounds of children playing and a future we would build day by day, I knew the ghost in the magnolia tree was finally, truly, at rest. And so, at last, was I.